recording, so
Ah.
sorry. So that's kind of around goals, like you said, but I think that's where people like fall off, right? Like you were just saying, it's hard to get that level of attention and focus and thought around being more, I think, calculated.
Yeah. Well, and like what we did too that helped us this time around is, you know, we hadn't added in like a layer of, or it wasn't in our thing of the layer existed in our org chart, but not in a like a can assign goals or rocks level, just because of how the program was set up. So we hadn't switched our program to have me have an operations level, which still does include Brian, but when I stepped up there more, basically what we looked at is we're like, hey, you know what? Despite best intentions, this meeting that's supposed to be high level strategy stuff keeps getting into operations stuff. And when we assign stuff from this leadership meeting, things stay here that should be they're greater operations level things, but they're not leadership meeting things, you know. So we added a couple layers, at least in the application. Obviously I'm still filling multiples of those roles, but it helped organize. So now our company goals, right, that we were talking about, the larger ones make sense, and then the other stuff is starting to be more actionable, because we said like, hey, at the leadership level there aren't really a ton of to-dos and rocks that actually stay at the leadership level too. There's some, right? But it's not as many as were happening, because as we discuss an issue and we decide what needs to be done with it, what tends to happen now that we did that is it drops into the bucket it's supposed to below, and the to-do is now an operations, a finance, a sales to-do. It's not a to-do in the leadership team meeting to discuss at the leadership team level that just happens to be assigned to an operations guy, like, you know what I mean?
Yeah.
And that has, it's funny because it's like you said, it's words and it's just conceptual, but it changes that meeting, because now in that meeting that to-do doesn't show up next time, and it shouldn't. That to-do is now an operations level thing. It's to be done there, and then all you're saying is, are we on task or not, and whatnot. So and then that stuff gets dealt with at a different level. So it's kept us from falling into that trap of like, oh, did you get that operations thing done, you know, and then let's talk about the work that you're doing right now, and oh, hey, so and so is doing this project, and now we're suddenly not talking about, now we're not working on the business, we're working in the business. So
yeah, that's interesting. It's kind of along the lines of you know, the noise conversation about being in leadership and what you're hearing from the front line and how much is coming back up. You know, it's kind of along those lines of where those issues get brought to the proper I would say like department level, and then you're right, you shouldn't hear about it in leadership. And I follow typically a little different meeting structure than what traction necessarily is. It's pretty close, but you know, my feeling is the weekly meetings are focused on department level, and then just the business unit and organizational meeting is just once a month. So those issues that you were saying kind of get brought down to the department level. You're right. The rest of the management team or leadership team shouldn't hear about that again until, if there's a rock, we do a you know, an organizational wide kind of rock check-in once a month.
Yeah, that's a good way to do it too. Like we've done where our leadership, even some of it is shifting of like, okay, let's talk about that. But that, like, I find that meeting isn't even as long on the leadership side because we've already done a lot of that work now.
Yeah.
So, you know, but we make sure to talk about that before we shift into whatever else. And like you said, maybe it could be a weekly, then that meeting would be longer and more, or monthly, longer and more effective. Right now it's a shorter, conversation, which is fine, because then Brian and I get to talk about stuff that we don't talk about normally, because we're busy and we don't always
Yeah.
get to distract.
Well, it's I with Wes and I, we were talking about the true traction is that you just do, is it on track, off track? That's it. You're
Yep.
not discussing it all. And he's just like, yeah, but I have these guys here, and we're trying to be better about if there's something that's affecting more business unit or organizational wide, let's talk about it now while I have you, sort of thing. So
Yeah, it's funny though. We're leaning, we might start going more pure traction. My thought on that is I've gotten more like talking to other companies that I know have implemented traction and have taken off. And the Chamber of Commerce had somebody else come into and talk about stuff too. And it's like, at a certain point, it's like, do you drink the Kool-Aid and do the thing the way it's meant to be done? Because it does work. And sometimes the things that we choose to not do that way are what are actually holding us back, and we just don't realize it, right? Yeah. That's a kind of a question, because what I think we end up doing, and I tend to do, if I don't do the level 10 meeting and I take it the way like you're talking about, and I do that, right? And I kind of want to get away from that, is I end up micromanaging more than I maybe should.
Yeah.
When it should be, are you on track or off track? If you're not, the discussion actually is at that point, does it need to be an issue? And what did the guy say at the river? Brian was telling me about it. I couldn't be on it. He said that if somebody feels the need when they say they're off track on a rock, if they feel the need to say, yeah, or I'm off track, but, or I'm on track, but, if they want to throw a but in there, then they make it an issue.
Yeah.
Then when they get to the issues, they vote on what's going to be talked about. So that may be high enough priority to be talked about, but when they're going through the rocks, and this, right? Because you're the one who taught me this, but we just haven't, it's hard to implement that way. But he said, yeah, that's what they did, is basically whenever somebody's like, yeah, but, they're like, okay, this is on their issue list now. When we get to the issue piece of the conversation, then we'll vote on our top priorities, and then we'll start going through them in priority order. I'm like, that's an interesting way to do it.
Yeah, that's we do each rock is 2 minutes, and it's if they can cover their butt in 2 minutes, then great. But then if it's reached 2 minutes and there's a need for more discussion, you're right, then it should be, because otherwise you're not going to get through the list. But I don't know. It's interesting. I have kind of an interesting relationship with EOS and traction. I respect it, and I've recently talked to yet another person that's an operations kind of guru who hates it. And yeah. I'm just like, how can there be such a wide variety? I think what I'm concluding is people who are business owners who don't have a strong operations understanding and experience and background tend to not like it, or like it, those that don't have that background, because it gives them a level of structure that is simplified. But like Faisal and this guy Bruce Locke, and I talked to another guy who have a long time history in operations, they don't like traction. They feel they've even said it's a disservice. And I think it's partly that they are deep in it. And my conclusion has always been, and I think it's still the same, it's a good tool for an entrepreneur. It starts at the top and works its way down and does give you a level of structure. But I think it doesn't go deep enough to me in what an operations platform should include. Where I get more into actual practices of like role descriptions and the task inventory and those sorts of things. So I've always felt that we're traction friendly, but I don't know that where do we position ourselves as, are we strict competitors to Traction, to say that if you're a Traction shop, we're out, you wouldn't need us, we directly compete against it? I've struggled with that. At the end of the day, a lot of it is the same, it's just a different way to get there. It's Mac versus PC, I think. But and everybody has their own methodologies and beliefs and philosophies around this stuff, and I guess you just pick the one that aligns best with you. So I don't know, I mean, like you guys are a Traction shop, but you've delved into this 3 Hag, right?
Yep.
um
Yep.
so I mean, there's clearly Traction you felt wasn't enough, there needed to be something else to augment or supplement what they are doing. Would you
Right.
agree to that?
Yeah, and we've talked about that before. I feel like they, there's some of the SWOT analysis and that level stuff, like they briefly touch on that, but like
Yeah.
what the problem I have with EOS that needs to be supplemented is not the overall concept. Like it's that they're designed, and they say it somewhere, but they're designed for like mid to large, right? Like they're not designed for small businesses. They're designed for it, like that program is designed for a business that really does have a base level in there that they just need to get a little clarity on and then put structure on top of it, right? Like whereas like we're spending a lot of time originally, and we're getting there now, but like building our product out, right? Because we know we were doing good stuff, but like what is our full, we were growing in that level and stuff too. And I think a lot of small businesses are.
Yeah.
So Traction is designed for a larger concept, I think.
Right.
And that's a big piece of it. And that's where, like you said, your task inventory and that stuff comes in. It doesn't account for that. I don't think it's supposed to. I think that Traction's role is to get everybody on the same page on how to accomplish, how to put a roadmap together to go forward, and how to consistently talk about it using the same vocabulary in a good way, like because most companies suck at running meetings, right? That's really a big piece of it. Like, and this gives you an outside thing, and it's nice from my perspective, right? Or even a lot of people, when you're trying to implement something, to be able to say, well, these people say it works, and it works, and you can see it works, and there's evidence. So when people are like, well, I don't really like, I want to spend more time talking about this, you could say, well, let's do what this book says,
right,
because it works, and you get people on board a little better.
Yeah.
Um,
That is very true, and it's something I'm, but anyway, I'm trying to circle us back to,
yeah.
Well, back to what we started with, you guys setting new goals. That's interesting that, in my notes prior to us getting on the call was, what is the overall purpose of analytics? And it does then, and in our conversation, how do you then connect, goals to your operations? And I think that's in the ballpark of where analytics come in.
Yep.
Are you guys creating around your new goals measurables for that then?
Yep. I've got some numbers and stuff. I'm building out, new reports. I kind of blew away some of the old standard KPIs a little bit, because I found that while they are KPIs that they say you need in the industry, this, that, and the other, we weren't really using them as much as we needed to, right? We were kind of paying lip service, and part of that is that it wasn't tied to the goals like you're talking about in the way it needed to be. And now, yeah, so our goals have we put pretty solid numbers in there, and most of our goals are tied to those. There's a few that aren't, just because, they're like relationship with other entity type goals, right? And so that doesn't have a great number tied to it. That's a different thing, but it does affect our other numbers. So yeah, yep, we definitely have some very good high level numbers, and then I'm developing on the operations side what numbers I need to meet, to meet some of that stuff too. And I've been pushing out to my team like, hey, this is the company goal now for the year. What do we need on our team to do that? And how do we track that, right? Like, what are we going to track on that? And telling them, like, we're going to track this and we're going to track this. And that's directly tied to this goal so that you guys know when I say, hey, you're not on this, right? Like, hey, your CSAT score here was a problem, and one of our goals is to make sure that while we're growing, we do not lose, we're not losing a certain income, right? We have actual percentages attached to that, like to make sure that we're proud of not having churn, right? And we don't want that to increase because we're growing, and so we have CSAT KPIs and stuff that we think are leading indicators, right? If you have really good CSAT scores with the client, then
What's
you're in a pretty good
CSAT?
place. Customer satisfaction.
Okay.
If you've got good customer satisfaction scores, and what's the other one? Net Promoter Score. That's the other one you can get out of Smileback or whatever.
So you guys are using Smileback.
Yep.
So Wes they were looking at that, and I think they concluded it was more trouble than it was worth.
Trouble.
What are your thoughts on it?
It was super easy to implement, and I think I don't know what trouble that they were going to run into on it. What people I shouldn't say this because I don't want to put words in their mouths. One thing that was a worry for me as an operations guy, but it was a good worry, right? And I embraced it, was like, I want to know if we have a problem, but I don't want to hear it because it sucks.
Yeah.
Right. And the problems, I think that the problems you expect are things like, oh, well, if we have people doing this, then what if they come back and there's negative things, and what do we do? And is that creating more work for us? Turned out for us, nope. There weren't a lot of negative things that were going on. People have been generally pretty happy. And we have not been getting a lot of the, you expect sometimes you get users that are just annoyed and they do bad reviews. That happens. Like we get a couple of those where from our end, I analyze it and I'll be like, was that a reasonable thing from that customer, or did they have an unreasonable expectation? At the same time, I still go to my team and say, hey, even though we think this was an unreasonable expectation, why did they have that expectation? Right. And why didn't we set it better for them? And then there's other things where it's nice because I'm, well, yep, that customer is right. And we've got, we reach out if it's a negative or a neutral and talk to them about it and say, yep, you're right. We messed that up, and here's our plan going forward so that doesn't happen again. You know what I mean? And that way they know that we care. So yeah, it creates a little extra work, but setting it up was easy. If that's the problem, then that's not, because we have ConnectWise, right? So it integrates really well. But there is some fear that it might not turn out well, and that but I wanted that. I hated it. I hated the fear, that fear of like, I really don't want to hear that I'm messing things up, but I need to know what I need to fix. Right. And one of the reasons we did it is we had a long time ago, this goes way back, we had an employee that's no longer with us, that he was having problems with some clients, and we asked client stuff, and they were nothing but like, oh, we're fine, whatever, right? Until we made the decision, and then they're like, yeah, it was a good thing you got rid of that guy, like, because we're Minnesota nice up here, right? And they're like, hey, he really wasn't doing good stuff for us. And I'm not trying to badmouth him. I'm just saying, like, he wasn't a good fit for us with those clients, and had done some things that but we didn't know because the client didn't tell us, right? And so those would have come out, I think, in customer satisfaction things. I think they would have, but they were afraid to say negative things about him because they didn't want to, be rude. They probably wouldn't have come back as negative. They probably would have come back as neutral though, and started a conversation.
Right.
So.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that's really frontline for sure. That's super frontline data. Are you compiling that and looking at that weekly with your
Mhm.
team?
Yep.
I mean,
Yep.
I'm sure the reporting on it kind of gives you scores and averages and so forth week by week or whatever, right?
Yeah, yep, we've embraced it. It gives, you can do, I do a weekly, and I track the weekly so that I can see where we're at. There's a 90-day, there's an overall, right? Like you can see all of that. I have it automatically emailing my guys, good, bad, or negative, right? Like I have it automatically emailing them so they know, I want them to feel rewarded. I don't have it emailing, it only emails if they leave a comment, right? Like, because if there's no comment in there, then, not a big
Right.
deal. It does on a neutral or negative though. A neutral or negative will email them either way because I want them to know it's happening. I want them to have a chance to be able to talk to me about why
Yeah.
and to contemplate why, and then I'll talk to them about it. And then we go to Brian, and Brian, he's our account manager guy too now. He's the one who talks to the client. We intentionally don't have it being me as the operations because, I don't want us to be defensive about it, and there's
Right.
that potential. So,
Yeah, he's
I put
liaison
together,
for sure.
yep. So I put together the case of like, this is what happened. This is why we think it happened. This is what we think we could do better. And we give it to him, and then he'll talk to them about it. And we've never had a negative response to that
Well, it's pretty
process.
proactive. I mean, to when that comes up to take that approach, I think people respect that. So what, one of the things that I want to look at or get your insights on, I look at the analytics and measurables in the hierarchy. So I'm going to maybe jump back and forth between the top and the bottom in this, but so top level financials are obvious, from an organizational standpoint. At the end of the day, the most important is profit, right? And then you're looking at revenue and expenses. You can do that at a high level and then kind of break that down. Where I've been focusing a lot of my thought and energy and getting some clarity on and is there's what is the first metric, or what are the metrics, especially on the client service side, client delivery side, that are relevant? What are metrics that are the last ones before it goes financial?
Are we going to talk leading or lagging indicators?
So it's leading to financial, but it's lagging to the rest of, let's say, the business unit or department. It's that hinge pin. When I look to a business unit director, what am I ultimately going to evaluate their performance on? How do I know that that business unit was successful or not? Specifically, I mean, what are the metrics? And there is the
So
financial. What's that?
Right? I mean, that's the lagging indicators you're talking about then, right?
Well, it's lagging to the rest of every other aspect of the business unit, but it's leading into the organizational financials. So like a business unit on client service has its own profit and loss, like client service does have its own specific expenses. They're the ones that are producing the revenue through its work and execution. And an example of, and I'm kind of gonna lead this a little bit, but there's something I call your capacity factor, that when you look at from a high level in an organization, you have the ability to deliver on your promise to your clients. That's delivery. And then you have demand. Delivery comes down to, in the balance of, how much capacity do we have? How much can we, with our current team, current technology, current equipment, current demand and market, what's the most that we can generate from our current situation? And what is the metric that drives that? At the high, there's financial, whatever that happens to be that I'm getting at, turns into money. There's a unit that turns into money. What are the limiting resources? What are the constraints in capacity? Ultimately, for an entire client service delivery. Am I confusing you?
No, but no, I mean, I think we're mixing some terms around and stuff, but I think we're all right. It depends on your business, really, right? Like the way I
100%.
look at it when you're talking that.
I'm looking at yours. I want to know what you.
So like for me, for instance, and I use lead and lagging. Like you're right in what you're saying. I think of it from an operations level, right? Like I think of leading as if this thing, if we get this thing, then we can reasonably expect this result. And then our lagging. So I think that metrics that you should have where possible, a leading and a lagging, right? So like we have the if this, then that, and then you measure the that to see. So if you're coming from a top down, right? Like if you're at the business, at the top of the business, you don't want to know, you don't need to know the operations leading indicator as much. You do need to know their lagging, right? You may want to know the leading in certain aspects. So when you're talking, anyway, let's get back to the capacity thing. So that to me is like, okay, I have metrics for like how many, how much time we spend per ticket, how many tickets we have per user, how many, how much time we spend per user, how much time we spend per workstation, those types of things, right? And those I track to make sure that they're staying stable, or if I can find ways to improve those, and those become goals, right? If I'm trying to increase my profit margin, is to improve those numbers. But I also use those to build my leading, right? Because then I can say, okay, we've got a client coming in with 30 users. I can reasonably expect, if they're an average client, and you have to assume, unless you know otherwise, you assume they're average, right? And this is built on an average. So some of my clients take up way more than they should, and some take way less. It's just is what it is. So anyway, you say, okay, I can reasonably expect that these are going to have, if it's an hour a user or whatever, and they're coming with 30 users, like I'm going to have 30 hours this month, or 30 hours a month, or not 30 hours. Yeah. It would be 30 hours a month if you were using those numbers I just gave you anyway. So added to my workload, then I can look at, okay, based on the guys that I've got and the tech utilization I'm at, right? Can I handle that, or do I need to hire somebody for that? Like, though that's really where I'm looking from a leading perspective, right?
Yeah.
When you're talking capacity, but you have to know, you have to be able to drill down to what kind of work you've got, and at whatever level that you're analyzing when you bring a new client in, or lose a client or whatever, right? Like that's where you got to get down to that unit, whatever you're basing your sales off of.
So you got to where I was getting at. I believe, it's what is all you talked about: time per ticket, average time per client. And all of those are leading to, as you aggregate that thing up to the top of the business unit, ultimately your capacity factor is your tech pool time availability.
Mm-hmm.
At the end of the day, your backlog is going to happen around the fact that you have limited time available work. I call it, it's around utilization rates, but it's what is the amount of time available for specifically client work. That's really the are you guys doing anything right now in trying to figure out what that is? Like you talked about, you're looking at sales, bringing on new clients. At the end of the day, what I'm getting at is you have to expand your constraint in your capacity of your service team. How do you come up with that?
Wait, say that again? I have to expand my constraint?
Well, I mean, at some point, like I said, I use the term capacity factor, that at the end of the day, I can calculate, or it would be nice for me and to calculate and so go to my sales team and say, hey, we have this much more space in our capacity that you guys need to sell into. But there's going to be a point if they continue to sell to where, all right, you've broken that, you've gone too far. And is there a metric? Do you guys have a way of tracking what that is? How are you balancing that your capacity to deliver with driving demand into it?
Precariously. It's basically the way I look at that is, so you should have a yearly goal of how much you want to increase your revenue and your recurring revenue, all that, right? You have that concept down. And then we worked backwards and said, okay, well, if that's the case, given each month of the year or whatever, to get to that number we want, we need to be able to bring in about this much, right? And the most likely way, right? And it's going to change over time, but you kind of look at, okay, well, let's say we're going for a certain recurring revenue. Well, to get that recurring revenue, we will need business that equals this many users, right?
So seats are users is
whatever your unit of measure is, right? Like for us, a lot of times it's users, right? Because that's easier to track. Like some MSPs do workstations, some do users, some do a mix. We've got other business stuff, so it changes. I'm just simplifying it down.
I was going to say the problem with IT is it's complicated.
Yeah, but let's just to simplify for the equation of the concept is, let's say your unit of measure is your widget, right, is users. So if I say, in order to get, like, each user is, we're going to charge this much, right? Like we know what we're charging for them. So to get our revenue goals, we need this many users. So you can break that down. And if you're tracking how much time you spend on average per user, right, then you should be able to, within a certain margin error, say, by this point, I'm going to need to hire somebody new if we add this many users in, right? And then you can talk to your sales and say, hey, this is where we're going. If for whatever reason, as soon as they have stuff in the pipeline and you're judging, and sales guys should have a pretty good idea on, this is a sure one, this is not, whatever, like they can give you a probability of how likely you are to hold down. So so you could say like, hey, we're on track to hire here, here, and here to meet our goal for the year, right? This is where we think we would need right now. And your sales numbers would need to be here, here, and here. What we now need to do is watch sales and say, sales, are you behind, on, or ahead of your numbers, right? And if they're like, well, we're ahead, okay, well now we need to bump our hiring up a little bit, right? And bump our, because it takes time to hire, it takes time to train somebody in. So now we need to move that to the right a little bit, right? And oh, you know what? No, we didn't make the sales we thought we were gonna. We think we're gonna make it up later. Okay, well then maybe I need to bump my training pipeline a little bit back and our hiring pipeline a little bit back. But it really just comes down to knowing where to doing the math to begin with, and you have to take your happy numbers, right? And you say, okay, well, if everything goes hunky-dory the way we plan, this is what it's going to be. It's not going to be, because nothing ever goes that way.
Right.
But then that's the stuff you're tracking weekly and monthly, and you're tracking, and you say, okay, sales, like, what do you got in your pipeline? When do you think that stuff's going to come to fruition? And you may need to say like, hey, we need to slow down right now, especially in our hiring market. Maybe it's hard to hire, because sometimes it's hard to hire the right people, and hey, hold up a bit. And then, there's other stuff from an operations side that you can get into of like, how do you make people more efficient, blah, blah, blah. Those are different goals, but those are different. Right now, you're assuming that those things haven't happened. So assuming that's not going to happen, you're going to hire this other way. If you have a way that you're going to make it more efficient, you can also start to calculate that in, and that complicates your number. And then you say, oh, well, I've got this other revenue model. But again, you can layer those on top of each other, do each of them a little bit separate, right? Like, oh, assuming this goes right, then this. And you should also know, right? Like, so if we have different sales methods, like where is my sales team focused, right? Because our company should have some primary focuses, and you should be able to say, okay, well, I expect from the users, from the user widget, I expect this much profit on average based on what we've done in the past and our planned marketing for the year. This is what we want. And from the workstations widget, we want this number. And from the hosting widget, we want this
Right.
number. If everything goes right, and then every time you're tracking it, you say, hey, where are each of these? And that will make you recalculate and refigure out where you're at. Right? That's how you bring in the complications. You bring them in by first stripping them out and then layering them on top of each other. Does that make
That's
sense?
interesting. It kind of brings up just kind of a little bit of a side thought that, people ask about the business units and when you would have a new business unit, a separate business unit. In one of the things that I would say to them is, if you have a service line that has a different capacity factor, that's an indicator that might want to be its own business unit. Kind of like the difference between your field support and you guys having your own co-location. That just kind of screams of that's a different capacity factor, don't you think? It's not about people's time, it's about space on servers.
Yeah, that's a way to do it. Another way is based on for you, it would be like task groupings or skill groupings, right?
Yeah.
Like
Oh, for sure. Yep, that would be
that's kind of the way I look at it. Is yes, if it's bringing in a completely different line of revenue, but each department sometimes has multiple lines of revenue that may take. But to me, it comes down, and maybe that's where you're talking with the capacity factors. You're tying capacity with the skill to do the thing, right? Because
for sure.
for me, it's this group of guys. If I'm training them, the most efficient way to train them is to train in these things, and that will have this really big effect on these widgets. That's its own business unit, right? Like if there's not a lot of crossover with the other business units, and there may be some, but
yeah, that and market, it's a different market. It's a different way of
yes,
being promoted and sold as well. I think that's part of that. That's definitely a sidetrack for another. So back to one of the questions I had in this conversation along analytics is, we touched on a lot of this. How do I, as the integrator, general manager, COO, how would I then evaluate using metrics the performance of your director on a business, using your company as an example? What I mean, I guess this is a question. Do you have do you have profit and loss numbers that you're accountable to?
well, I'm the primary director, so we just assume that the directors are awesome in our company.
We just
no, yes and no. No, not really. Yes, incoming, because that helps. It's not even to me. It helps me hit better numbers the right way, right? We've been growing that, and that's a part of our growth. Is that that stuff used to be much more traditionally in Brian's wheelhouse and in the finance department, and I've been pushing for, I need to know my numbers over here, and we need to break them out by unit better and stuff. And so we are getting there now,
Yeah.
right? But that takes time. That's just another layer on top of stuff. The way I look at it is, so to judge how well somebody's done, it's you look at what you gave for what you have for your goals, and you have leading indicators. I think are they are what I care about from an operations director standpoint, right? Like I want to know what the leading indicator is, so I can say that I think we're going to get to the right spot. But what I should be held accountable for is if we hit those numbers, right? And how do I put this? My guys are expected to perform in a way where my users, right? Like, let's go to the users number being, if we say it's an hour of work per user. If we are falling behind on our tech utilization, if we're falling behind to where that number that we're expecting is no longer an hour, it is now higher because I haven't done my job on training, organizing, whatever, and now we're starting to spend more than an hour per user, then that's throwing all of our stuff out of whack. And you'll see that in your lagging indicators, right? You'll see that in that we're expecting a certain amount of profit from bringing on this new business, and we aren't meeting that. So, and that's where you would probably be bringing in your profit loss stuff.
Are you guys
I know that's a
currently
really
tracking that information, like time per user?
What was that?
Are you currently tracking that information?
I have numbers for that. I have numbers for my personal use that, and then I share some of it up as, but yeah, I know on average how much time, and I'm not going to throw it out because not everybody needs to know all my numbers, but I know I know what to expect if we bring in a new user, how much time should be spent on average per user. And what that is like, a company will have 50 users or whatever, right? And they'll reach out for support, and then my guys put their time in the tickets as they're doing stuff, and then I track the billable hours for them and whatnot. And I say, okay, so per user here, we spent this much time, or I take, for this client, we spent this much time. They have 50 users. I can do the math, and I can do it across all of our clients, and I can do the math and say, so per user on average, we spend this much time, right? So I can do that.
So then are you also in, connecting the dots, and I'm kind of going around and around on this, but are you connecting the dots back then with total, the availability of your total pool, like that's utilization rate times your number of techs kind of a thing? Are you,
Yep.
are you then?
Yeah.
That's
my tech utilization numbers. I don't really like that, so I'm redoing those right now. But yeah, I still kind of do. So there are no industry averages of like, oh, you should have the tech utilization of this, that, or whatever. We have a certain atmosphere within our company that I like, our guys like working there, and that does tie to what I expect that for their utilization, right? And whether or not they're hitting it all the time is what I need. I need to fix my reporting on that. It's broken. My gauge is broken, but I still have a pretty good idea on average of how many hours they spend per, just generally getting work done. And you got to factor out that they need to be able to take lunch. They need to be able to stand up and walk around and bullshit and all those things. And I will not remove that from my guys because I think that makes them better workers and a better team. And so my number is probably lower than some of like the best out there MSPs. But that's fine because our guys are super happy.
Can you hold on 1 second? I have somebody coming to do some repairs on some stuff. I just need to let them in. I'll be right back.
Not a problem.
All right. Yeah. Wow. Cold wreaks havoc. My dog, I'm struggling with. She doesn't want to go outside to go potty. Oh, boy. 4 or 2. Yeah. So I have to keep an eye on it. So how have you been? Good. Spent a couple weeks in Florida. So wonderful. We just got back Saturday. So this is one of them. She was like, I wonder if For now, I think it's just those two. I gotta run out and get some clear silicone here. Okay. Sorry about that, Dana.
You're fine.
All right, now the getting back to
Yeah. No, that's fine. So yeah,
I'm
you're
trying-
talking about if I tied so if I tied stuff in, so the way a way to do it, just to these numbers aren't accurate. I'm just throwing them out there to make this easy. But like, so like, let's say I say my tech can do 6 hours of work a day, right? That's not unreasonable, right? That's not the best, but it's not great. It's not great, but it's not terrible, right?
well, and
that's
I think that's good. That's 75%.
well, you know what? It's funny is that most stuff in the MSP space, they want more. I think that leads to burnout, but whatever. So
I
let's
agree.
assume they can do 6 hours, and let's pretend that a user is like the numbers that have been thrown out there. Like, let's say a user is 1 hour a month, which is a lot, really. But anyway, that tech would be, so basically per tech you could bring on 180 users. It's that, you know, that basic. And then as an operations guy, my job is to do what I can to reduce the number of hours required per user by making my team more efficient, right? So that per tech I can bring on more people, and then we'll be more profitable. That's what I want to do. Obviously, within reason, you hit walls and stuff, right? Like,
Yeah.
but you should always be striving for that. And when you bring on somebody new, your number is going to go bad for a little while because it takes what, like 6 months to really
So
get
that's
somebody
exactly
trained?
what I was going to say. We were doing a spreadsheet that showed quarterly, where, you know, we looked at each tech and where they were, what we had an expectation of utilization rate per quarter. And our feeling was, you know, often you're not selling into adding new techs necessarily. You're selling into that tech getting better and their utilization rate going up. With a target, the target was 75, but you're hiring them at 30. You know, and then you look at a quarterly progression that would say that, you know, as that person gets more efficient and understands our solutions and understands our workflows, you know, then that person should get to, by the end of the year, that 75%, let's say. So that's something that
Are you saying that they have because of training time?
Well, that's part of it. I think just several factors going into when you hire someone new, they're not going to be, their utilization rate is not going to be somebody that you've had for 2 years. Even if they have the skill set, I think it's just getting to know the clients and getting to know the processes and your tools. Maybe they don't know ConnectWise. Maybe they don't. So there's, well, that's a great question. That would be a great conversation. What goes into someone being more efficient in their day-to-day execution? What, as far as a tech?
I was going to say, because actually when you talk utilization rate, like just because they didn't get the ticket done fast, like they're still working on that ticket, right? And so they're still utilized, right? But the number that goes up isn't tech, or that changes isn't tech utilization. The number that changes there is some of it, right, from training time, but the number that actually is affected by a new user is number of hours per ticket or number of hours per user. That number goes up when you have new techs, right? The tech utilization doesn't change because they're still being utilized. Yeah, a little, like I said, a little if you account for training time, but besides training time, even though they're not more efficient, the number that you're really worried about is how fast can that tech get a ticket done, or how fast are they able to get the work done that needs to be done, how efficiently, and that goes up over time. So that's one of the factors that brings that number down.
And it's interesting, it goes back to the ultimate dilemma, I think, of a tech company or a service-based company that bills by the hour. There's a different mindset in the metrics if you are doing an inclusive flat monthly rate fee based situation, or you're doing an hourly arrangement, a break fix hourly arrangement. If you're doing hourly, you're less likely to care. I mean, of course you have to weigh in, what you're billing the client and so forth. But if you're doing an inclusive program, you really want them efficient, right?
Well, that's one of the reasons that the industry wants inclusive more usually, right? Is because then you start to be able to control your profit margin better, right?
Yeah.
Because now the things that you do give you every efficiency you're able to add gives you more money.
Yeah,
Whereas
right.
adding
It pays to
efficiency
innovate.
to the hourly doesn't. Adding efficiency to the hourly stuff it increases your customer satisfaction, which could increase your profit by, bringing in new business or having them keep with you, blah, blah, but that's much more intangible, which is why the MSP industry pushes so hard for more inclusive stuff, because then you're able to really, by giving your client the best service you possibly can, you're also increasing your profit.
Right.
So that's like the best of both worlds to me, is that your client gets the best out of it because now you're getting stuff solved faster.
But there's risk in
money.
it. There's always this sense of risk in a flat monthly fee based engagement, and that they could abuse it. And now you're not getting compensated potentially for. But I think as your client base grows, that averages out to where that risk it becomes minimal or manageable.
Yep. And that's where, so one, that's why you deal in averages. And two, that's when you start to fire clients.
Right.
Right. That's when you start to, once you've hit a point where you feel comfortable in doing that, now you can start to say, hey, I'm sorry, but you're bringing all of my numbers up. You're not going to tell them that in that way, but you know what I mean? Like internally, you're like, hey, this client is like, we like them. We would love to work with them, but they are costing us a significant amount of money because of XYZ. And what you first look at, obviously, is can we do anything to reduce that? Like, why? First, you start with the why is this happening? But if you're met with resistance from the client whenever you try to fix that, then they're not a good client for you.
Right.
Maybe they're a better client for somebody else, that especially maybe somebody who does it by the hour. But yeah, you do.
Are you guys doing, where are you at with the fixed rate programs?
What do you mean? We do that a lot more now. And then, yeah, that's our primary goal. We want clients that are on MSP, managed services. We want them. I would prefer, I don't like nickel and diming people. They don't like it either. So we factor in what we expect, to happen with that client over averages so that we can charge appropriately. We feel like we've got our rates pretty well figured out.
You have options that they can pick if they want to be on that or not?
No.
So you're only doing at this point an all-inclusive plans?
For the most part. Sometimes Brian will do something more customized, but usually that's not managed, right? That's usually at a different level. We do some stuff with certain clients, like we have some that we do colo with, so we charge a little bit different there because they're doing, but if we're managing people's stuff, we're pretty solid on this is what we're going to do.
But that doesn't include project work. We're just talking about support, right?
Depends.
With the fixed monthly fee kind of a situation.
Yep.
It's the monitoring, maintenance, patch management plus support.
Yep.
And then normally, are you then billing, by the project? Let's say they're going off to 365 or whatever. That you would bill as a project, yes or no?
Yep. Sometimes depends on the scale of the project, and we should more. But it depends on the scale of the project and the relationship with the customer.
So you might
Okay.
just include that in with their plan, their program, their monthly fee program.
Like it depends. Like it depends on the project. On the
Gotcha.
365 one, like we would probably charge for that because that's going to take much more resources and whatnot. But if like for instance, like if I've got a client that hasn't really needed a lot of support and that in whatnot, like I might do a little extra project work for them here and there to because they deserve it. Like
Yeah.
they've been a great client. And but no, that's something we are getting better at. We used to include a lot more that we shouldn't have, right? Because it was easier. And now we're doing less of that and better when we're better at billing for it and whatnot. And that just has to do with having people that are focused on it more and stuff. So yeah, we do try to charge for project work as much as possible because it's projects. And you know what? Clients don't mind it. They know it's going to cost a little bit more for it. And they expect it and it's professional. And so, yeah.
So I've been trying to bring this conversation from, high level. We didn't talk a lot about the financial because I think that's pretty obvious organizationally. We talked about the business unit level and into departments. I'd like to spend a little bit of the rest of the time here about frontline and how you are presenting benchmarks and metrics to your frontline team members, and what are they looking at from a daily, weekly, monthly standpoint? How are you sharing? Are you guys doing one-on-ones or as a team looking at some performance metrics for them?
Generally as a team. I feel like we're pretty open about that stuff. And so I share it with the team, and I don't share every metric just because it would be overwhelming.
So what are
I try to share metrics that they care about. And like I said, I'm revamping some of these, but like they for sure see the CSAT. I used to share their tech utilization, but like I said, that gauge is broken.
What was that?
My tech utilization gauge is broken. Once I fix that, they get that because I want them to know how utilized they are and what I'm seeing on that, right? And that I use to beat them up over not timing themselves correctly, as all MSPs have to do all the time, constantly, because techs just don't time themselves correctly, and it is what it is. My guys know it's kind of like a joke too, like they know they get on it pretty good, and then they know when I'm about to bug them about it, and they'll start getting like, oh, here comes Dana with that. Anyway,
are you talking about them tracking their time?
Yeah, that's a part of tech utilization, right? Because
sure, that's the biggest part.
Right, and so if that seems off, like I'll be bugging. We're like, man, I was here. I know what work you did. Why doesn't this number match that? Like, what's going on?
Boy,
right? and I do that very publicly.
If a guy could crack that nut to get techs to track their time properly, you'd be a millionaire. That's every tech company. That's a problem.
It blows me away. And the people that are the worst at it, I swear to God, I'll be like, hey, you know why we're doing this? Yeah, we're doing it for this, and this reason. I totally agree with them. Then why aren't you doing it? I don't know.
Yeah. Okay. Well, I'm bad about it.
It's everybody is to a certain degree. It really just comes down to interest, right? Like, especially in the tech space, techs are interested in solving problems. I have a feeling a lot of techs are ADHD. Maybe not. I know I am. And I know that ADHD, you get very interested, you solve the thing, and then your brain moves on. And writing down how you did it is not a part of that process. You know what I mean? And like tracking your time correctly. And when they're good techs are very focused on their customers. And so they feel bad slowing a customer down by taking the time to do the things. They just all they want to do is solve the problem for the client. And that's where the real problem lies. Anyway, to get back to the topic, like I track phone answering rates, right? Like I track how often that phone gets answered in the queue. If it went over into overflow, which, you know, like Robin will answer. And I do that so that I can get a feel of, are my guys like getting themselves too busy to answer the phone? Like what, you know, whatever. What other things do I track? I have a goal.
So one of the things that I'm trying to be trying to really get a good understanding of, or a good sense for, is what are the relevant so ultimately, why are you presenting that to a frontline person? It's about affirming and validating performance, right?
Yep.
And so what do you share with them in part of their daily and weekly evaluation revenue numbers?
No.
Nope.
No, because techs, yes, they could know it. Yes, they might be a little interested in it, but they're really not, right? The frontline workers don't need to know the revenue. They need to know how their numbers tie into the overall company, which I will tell them that stuff, but no, because when you start getting into the finance side of stuff, you start getting more abstract, and people start getting
Abstract, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah. And they start getting more concerned about stuff in a different way. With frontline workers, I want them to see the value of their work, not the dollar numbers. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
Like, and the value of their work, yes, there is money attached to it, obviously. And I do tell them like our goals are profit. I do talk about that stuff, so I'm not hiding it. But I think that the average person really doesn't feel the value of their work as money. They feel it as accomplishing things. You know what I mean?
And that's it's exactly that. Or you're back to what I said when we started, is what are the metrics that are going to affect their behavior? And it needs to be not abstract. It needs to be in context, and it needs to, I think for the most part, what really is going to resonate with a frontline tech is, am I servicing the client? Is the client happy? And you're getting that in those CSAT numbers. And then I think the other thing, the other way I look at it is, what can they control in the behavior based on the numbers? And I think that's their utilization rate. You know,
average time to resolution. I do that one.
And time to resolution.
Average time. Yep.
Sure.
How long it's taking you to resolve tickets? SLA met percentages. I'll tell them if they're meeting SLAs or not. I used to track touches per ticket, but I don't like that one. And one that's weird that I track is kill rate, right? Like what kill rate is, how many tickets were opened versus closed in a week. That's not tied to their performance as much. I use that to tell them, to help them see. I'll be like, hey, we closed, you know, we had a kill rate under 100 last week. Expect then that this week might be a little more busy because you have leftover tickets, right? Like,
yeah,
I use that to kind of give an indicator of where we're going. And I've taught them a little bit on how to start to see like how that kill rate is going to affect their future work. But
this is one that is a dilemma that you might have time to resolution. That's been a tough one. Where is, how meaningful is that?
It depends. I need to break mine out more. Right now it's not good because average time to resolution is over all tickets. And my plan, one of my plans this year is to break that down in a more relevant manner. Because the reason it's not relevant right now is it's not by priority level in my number. It's just an average of all. So average, how long it takes you to solve, you know, priority 4 ticket, that drags your whole number up. And so that number becomes irrelevant, right? Because people
the classic argument is that we're waiting on the client.
Yeah. Well,
it's out of our control.
I will say though, my average time to is this one, did I calculate this one? I had one calculated where it was not, this one is not that way. This one is different. I did have one where I was, and I got to experiment with it and build it out, where it was tracking how many hours the tech actually spent on the ticket as the time to resolve, you know what I mean? Like, so yeah, the one I have right now is an average time overall, but I wanted to do one because I thought it might be more relevant, and I don't remember why I haven't done it yet. Maybe I chose it, maybe I couldn't get it right, but I wanted to do one that said you spent 15 hours on this on this ticket, right? And that's too long. Whereas, or you spent an hour on this ticket or 15 minutes, right? Like, I think that is more relevant than when you have waiting.
Yeah.
Waiting should pull it out, right? Like, because to me, waiting, if you're doing your statuses correctly, waiting on client, waiting on third party, waiting on whatever, should pause your timers, because you should only put them in those status if they're not on you and there's nothing you can do about it.
I
Right.
mean, ultimately though, client satisfaction to me comes down to how quickly are you solving my problems?
Nope. Client satisfaction comes down to how well are you communicating with me about what is being done. Right. So if that, and that's where the waiting matters, right? And why only putting it in a waiting, I have 3 waiting statuses, and you better be communicating with the client. One is waiting on client, right? And clients know, so clients aren't going, and that's why I say this number actually matters, because you say it's waiting on client. And so, give me a second, I gotta respond to Brian quick, and then I'll keep down this thought. So I got it. So basically, it pauses because you're waiting on them, and they know that. So they're in their brain, they're not thinking, well, tech's not getting my job done. They know we're waiting on them.
Yeah, that's what I mean, but in general, if I'm calling out to a service provider, and let's say they pick up the phone, they get the thing done, and from the minute I called, it's done in an hour. I'm a pretty satisfied client.
Yeah, but that would never go in waiting.
Right. So you're segmenting out the non-waiting, or I'm saying if it's nothing on me, the way I would evaluate a tech company is how expeditiously they solve my problems.
Correct. If it's not waiting on you,
right,
or a valid,
sure.
Right. And so, and that's where it comes down to, like, if I'm communicating clearly, and this is borne out in my CSAT scores, right? Like, if I'm talking to a client and I don't communicate, I will probably get a negative score.
Yeah.
If I'm waiting on something. But if I'm working with a client and I say, hey, the problem is this part, so we need to order that. This is gonna, so it's going to take a couple days for that to come in. And so now it's going to go waiting for parts, or waiting on third party, right? Because it's waiting for that part to come in. That client isn't going to not be satisfied, because I've done everything I could as expeditiously as possible. They understand shipping.
Right, for sure.
Right. And so that's why I say you take that waiting time out when you track this number. Or if I say, hey, this requires, and I'm very clear about, like, this requires this thing, and I'm waiting on results or whatever, right? And they know, and they understand that, then they haven't been mad. And I get good numbers and good scores, because clients are smart enough to understand when you explain it, like, why it's waiting and why. So a ticket could take a week, and they could be just as happy with your service, as long as they know that it's waiting on a valid reason and you've done everything for them as expeditiously as possible. But you can't put it in waiting if what you're waiting on is the time to go do the work for them, right?
That's exactly my point. Do you have the capacity?
And that's sitting in progress. That's not sitting in a waiting status. That's sitting in progress, and that's being timed, and that's on us. And that's why I say your statuses have to be set correctly to pause only when it's something that would be, that would take it out of a customer's irritation factor, if that makes sense.
Right. I mean, to me, as far as frontline work, and really, we're looking at as a tech, because that's both of our worlds, but that's any service company. I think how expeditious things, and everybody, there is a level of expectation, but at the end of the day, the faster the better. People want their shit done on that. So
Yeah.
I
What you're kind of hitting on is ticket touches too, though. And
yeah,
that's why I used to track ticket touches. I stopped because tracking ticket touches also encourages less communication. Because sometimes you go back and forth with a client nowadays because clients like to email. And I want us to communicate more. So a ticket may have 5 touches, and that might actually just be you're contacting them back and forth.
oh
You know
right.
what I mean? And so that's why that number stopped to be as effective. And I haven't figured out a good way yet to convert that to where I can see meaningful touches, right? Because you should try to solve it. I would like to solve everything in one touch, but that just isn't,
Right.
that isn't the way most stuff is, unless it's very simple. Like the stuff that people don't care about is the stuff that's one touch. The stuff that people care about, it takes a bunch of stuff because they know it's a more complicated thing. And those are the ones you're actually going to get good reviews on because they feel like it's more complicated.
Right.
Very few people are giving you great reviews on a password reset. They do, but it's, they just expect the password reset to be easy for you and they don't care.
Right.
Anyway, you were going to wrap this up?
Yeah, I was gonna say, I haven't really thought through beyond this in the next couple of months, and any thoughts that you have on any topics that would seem interesting or timely for you?
I don't have that. I'll let you know. I'll reach back out, but no, I haven't been thinking about it. So I don't have
I
any.
do have a list I'll look at, but the one thing that I look at almost kind of seasonally, in kind of where at the end of the year, we spent the last 3 months, September, October, November on strategic planning, just because that's relevant to people typically doing that at the end of the year. And then I always follow up. I think analytics and measurables is relevant to strategic planning. You set these goals. Now, how are you going to measure?
Mhm.
The other, at this time of year, I think getting into Q1, you've set the strategic plan. That's all about the organization. And then, how are you developing your team? Specifically from a aspect of competency development. So that was what I was going to propose for next month is, training programs. What are you doing as a director or manager in your organization to develop your team's competency? Some different approaches to that. Do you follow Tom Foster at all?
No.
So he's my guru that I follow. He's a student of Elliot Jocks that I base most of my stuff on. But he did a post this last week. I can send a copy to you or a link to it, but around, what is, how do you measure competency or what's involved with competency? It's a really interesting approach to it. It's very, very, very similar and aligns pretty directly to the GWC. That is all, the traction stuff. Are you guys doing that part of traction at all?
Get it, want it, capacity to do it.
Yep.
Yep.
So are you doing that in
our quarterly and yearly reviews for text?
Yeah.
We talk about it, and then and I keep it in mind when I'm designing, as we're growing, which I think about that, yeah, for sure, and that ties into the training stuff pretty well. But yeah, I very much think about that and where I think people want to go, and I have a lot of talks with people about where they want to go. Most of the time they don't know, but I at least want everybody to know that I give a shit. They're not always going to get what they want, but I'm going to try my best to give them the opportunities to grow where they want to grow. So yeah, I think you have to do a really good job on that, especially in today's market. We don't have a lot of turnover, and there's a reason for that.
How is the market right now, do you feel, as far as quality techs?
Difficult. We just did some hiring, and like, man, and maybe it's just the way the programs and stuff, like we had it set to where, because we want somebody that can be in there at least 2 days a week. We don't want fully remote, and we had it clearly indicated. And the number of applications that you get from people in Texas and wherever else, like one of the questions, we actually have a question to answer that says it's required, like, can you work in the Inver Grove office location, right? And somebody responded to that remotely, like, so we're getting a lot of that. And I know that our job market, if I opened us up to more remote, which we could do, then it would be easier, especially in the tech sphere. There's not a lot of reasons that you can't do that, other than we want our team to operate as a team. And it's not even that you're cooperating on tickets when you're in-house. It's that those 2 days in-house, you're interacting with each other differently. It creates different bonds, and those bonds help people do better work. Well, that's a whole series we could talk about, even is
for sure.
That's a whole meeting right there, is remote work versus in-house in today's market, and what the best ways to do that are. But anyway, that has complicated our hiring process. It doesn't help us any, but yeah, it's tight right now.
Which I'm surprised by, because I just feel like there's so many people going into the field that I would think, unless the result is there's a lot of people in it, there's just not a lot of good ones.
Part of it too is the position we were looking for. And we were looking for a more senior position, because we needed a new escalation point because of the positions we had to add. Going forward, I'm hoping to be able to add lower level people and grow them to the right positions.
Yeah.
But that's tough in a small business, because small business, you're hiring for a specific role now, right? Like, you need to fill that now. Growing somebody within a small business is a lot harder, because you don't have the large capacity, right? So, and as you fill, you need things now. And so as we grow, that'll become easier. But the role we had to fill was a more senior role. And that's not.
Well, and that's something that Faisal has the mindset. He was involved in some of the strategic planning last year in Mankato. He was just like, well, be proactive then, and hire 2 right now. That's way more than you need, but do it anyway. Invest in that, and have that person coming along. And I think that all sounds good.
Yeah, that's great if you're not in a small business that,
right,
that has to, plan, and that is, especially in the world that we were just in, where everything is like all wacky and stuff, like, but
there is a sense that you can then kind of see how they develop. And it's nice if I guess if you have the resources financially for that. I know that that's a big theory of constraints aspect, is to do some of that ahead of time, to hire way far ahead of the need. And it's kind of part of that staffing planning and capacity planning. But there is a reality of just the financial resources to do that. It would be great.
I would argue we'll be there better soon, but keep in mind the stuff we just discussed today that we're just getting better at, that most small businesses aren't good at yet, is tracking the numbers to be able to say in 6 months, if we stay on the trajectory we plan on, we will need a body, right? Like, if you can't do that, how do you hire 2 people now? How do you even know you're hiring them into the right spot, right? Like, you don't, if you don't have your numbers. And that's the problem. That's the problem of a small business. And as you grow, you'll find you have more people, which gives you a little more leeway, and you'll start to know your numbers. About the time you're starting to know the numbers, you're starting to get the right amount of people to where it's not as it's not as
Yeah.
bad anyway. And so, yeah, but when you're a up to 7-man shop, 8-man shop, whatever, even 10, like you're kind of in that place where you probably you don't know what's coming down the pipe.
You're guessing by stress. You're looking at, are we getting projects, the back, kind of your intuitive backlog.
Yeah,
You're kind of looking at, hey, we're not getting to stuff, or our team is stressed out. It's really a kind of a reactive sense. But anyway, I will send out an email around some topic considerations. I do plan to be back in person, getting together next month, whether it's just you and I haven't really been promoting too much. And so we'll see how that goes. I've been feeling like this is a pretty good, enjoyable thing for me and for you, I hope. And
yep.
there's some others that have shown a little bit of interest. I know Wes, with some of the Mankato, with he and Brian, his director, that they've expressed interest, but they're swamped and busy. They're actually struggling to hire right now. So they had their support desk dispatch person leave. So that kind of then trickles to Brian, to oversee it and be involved a lot more in that kind of stuff. So, but
Yeah,
anyway, all right, I will send out a copy of the recording as usual, and then we'll touch base for next month.
All right.
TADs, nice to talk to you, Dana.
Later.
Bye.